All right. We'd like to say welcome once again. This is Saturday. The weekend is here, and I'm your host, Alexander L. Red of the Gracious Hope Podcast. Reverend Swat S. Dede, our co host, is not in today due to some obligations on this weekend. And so today, we'd like to say welcome to the Gracious Hope Podcast. And of course, today we have a very special guest. Today we are talking about where we came from as Liberians and even as Sierra Leoneans and West Africans, not just from 1822 or 1847, but from a much deeper past that most of us were never taught in school. Our special guest is Liberia's renowned historian, Dr. C. Patrick Burrowes, and he is an author of many books. And the most notable one, the latest, is called Sea Salt, Kola, and Grains of Paradise, the untold history of Liberia's early ancestors. His work brings together oral tradition, Arabic and European records, maps, stories, and memories to help us see our region with refreshing eyes. Dr. Boris is in our studios today, and we'll be welcoming him. And it is an honor to have you here on our podcast today, Dr. Boris.
Well, thank you, Rev. I really appreciate the invitation and glad to be with you and with your audience.
Yes. We are so excited because this conversation, I mean, as a dialogue, is not just about dates and names. It is about identity. It is about trade. It is about leadership. It is about culture and even politics, if I may add, and how our past is still shaping our present condition in our homeland, Liberia. And so for this segment, we'll look at history as a mirror we'll all look into. So tell us, Dr. Burrowes, in your work, you describe history as both factual and emotional, and you also say that it is also political. So if history is not a dead museum, but a mirror we all can look into, when we look into the world of our early ancestors on this coast, the Green Coast, what do you see staring back at us today as Liberians and West Africans?
What I see is actually, I started this work more than 30 years ago. And as my journey progressed, what I saw, what came into view was shocking to me, was surprising because of what we had assumed and what many who have written before, claimed. Our region had been presented as somehow outside of history. People were not participating in major events. And so what I see in the mirror is actually a place that was the crossroads of West Africa. There were a lot of interactions, going all the way up to the Sahel, beyond the Sahel to the Mediterranean, the Middle East. So there was international trading and so forth. And so for me, it was a revelation, and it was exciting to be able to capture that story and to be able to share it.
Indeed, a revelation. And sea salt, cola, and grains of paradise, the untold history of Liberia's early ancestors. You can get a copy from the bookstore. That is from Amazon.com. And he also has a page on Facebook. It's called Know Yourself Press. You can follow him on Facebook and you will get a whole lot. And before we continue our conversation here, I saw a clip regarding this book here, and I would like to share with our audience before we continue with our conversation here. So let's go here. Let's go. Let's play this video. It is very, very interesting.
Work that I've spent 30 something years doing. And I published Between the Kola Forest and the Salty Sea some years ago. What I decided to do was to boil everything that's in that book down and add a lot of illustrations, maps, and bring it to an average reader mostly Liberian readers actually, so that the history gets into the hands of as many people as possible. I think that one really important aspect of history is that it can be really empowering if it tells people the truth about who they are and where they've been. Liberians have been represented as lacking history, lacking any major contributions to the world, and that's simply not true. And so when we look at Kola, which is embedded in West African culture across the region, our Gola ancestors were the inventor, the ones who discovered that, its properties and dispersed it. We look at Malageta spice. It used to grow only between River Cess and Capamas in Liberia. And in doing my research, I found that it was being sold in Spain and in Italy by around 11,000 AD. So it's been on the market for hundreds of years. And that was because, our folks saw the value of it and they were selling it up north to the empires in the Sahel. And beyond that, it went all the way across the Mediterranean. So our ancestors made significant contributions, moved forward in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, the transatlantic slave trade was a setback. And for those who like to deny that it occurred in our region, the evidence is overwhelming. And one aspect is in the US, there are two groups of folk side by side, the Gullah and Geechee, who are known to have been the descendants of the Gola and the Kisi, many of whom were brought to that part of the US, placed in the swamps specifically to grow rice. And they were brought because they knew the technology of that. So we ought to stop this denial and to claim our rich story in all of its complexity, and to recognize our relatives wherever they may be, because the culture that was brought continues in the regions occupied by the Gullah and the Geechee in America. The basket weaving, the iron smelting, those things persist in some aspects of the music. And so this book tells all those dimensions of the story, and I'm excited to be launching it now. The book is going to be available, it is available, I should say, on knowyourself.press online, knowyourself.press. That's a company that published all my work. In Atlanta, it will be available at Mina's restaurant, and we'll be adding other outlets around the country and in Liberia.
What an amazing story to share with us here today. And we are so delighted. We are so delighted to hear or come across this book. I read this book on my way to Washington, D.C. in a plane, a 4-hour flight. And then the next day, I texted you to let you know how excited I was. And that prompted me to say, hey, we got to talk about this on a podcast.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of Liberians, they read books and they read for various reasons, but this book caught my attention because the substance of the book. And we're talking about almost 30 decades, 30 years of research.
Yeah.
And those decades, you condense them into 150 pages. That is amazing. And also here, before we go on with our questions, you were recently recognized for your contribution to research in Liberia by the president of Liberia, Joseph Boakai, as the Star of Africa Order at the rank of Grand Commander, one of the nation's highest civilian honor. What an honor. And your
Yes.
contribution, of course, it is a lasting impression for many of us. And so as we look through your book here, or as I look through your book, the question I would like to ask you is that most of us grew up with school books that start Liberia's story with settlers in 1822 or independence in 1847. But your literary work pushes us much further back. And if our story truly begins long before those dates, how does that change who we are or who we believe we are today as Liberians?
Well, the reality is that um, we cannot understand ourselves if we don't understand the long story, the journey, if you will. I'd like to compare history to a river. So if someone is standing on the bank of the St. Paul River, say someplace around Virginia or near the mouth of the river, Tuer River Farm or something on Bushwood Island, and they take a snapshot of the shoreline and they say, oh, here's the river, this is the St. Paul. Well, the reality is it is a snapshot of a place along the river, but it is not the river because the St. Paul runs from Guinea through Lofa all the way down to the Atlantic. And to take a snapshot and to present it as the river is actually misleading. So the reality is that there were processes in play prior to 1822 that helped to explain what happened in 1822. In other words, we cannot understand why the ACS selected Cape Mesurado unless we understand what was going on at Cape Mesurado before the ACS came. I'll share something with you, Rev. When I published the Kola Forest book, right, the precursor to this one, the broader scholarly book, I will go out to give book talks. People will come to me and they say, look at the book. Is Pedro de Centra in this book? Pedro de Centra, for many Liberians from our Leone elementary school, books, we knew that he was the first Portuguese who came to our coast, right? Well, people present the story in that way as if his arrival is the beginning. The reality is, the Central was sent to that area by Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal because they wanted to find the source of the Melagata spice. In Spain and in that region of the Mediterranean, they call Malagueta the grains of paradise. So our ancestors attracted Pedro de Centra to come. But many of us, when we look at our story, we look at it through the eyes of Pedro de Centra arriving as if he discovered us. Doesn't make sense. So my point is that we need to appreciate the long flow of the river of Liberian history. And it began, and I try to go back as far as I could using all the sources that are available: archaeology, linguistics, oral history, and so forth.
Yes, yes, indeed. And when we talk about trade, we talk about goods and the world of our ancestors. The question that comes to mind is the title of your book is very striking: Sea Salt, Kola, and Grains of Paradise. These sound like simple products, but you treat them almost like characters in a story. What does these three items tell us about the kind of world our ancestors built along this grain coast?
Well, the reason I selected to focus on those three is because they really help to shape the history of that region. Let's start with sea salt. Sea salt or salt was scarce in the area of the Sahel. The Sahel is where the empires of Mali and Ghana and Songhai, that's where they were. they were constantly looking for salt. A lot of people were living in that region. Our day ancestors began boiling seawater to extract salt. And they created a trade town where Bopolu is now, where they would go to meet the merchants who came from the north to buy commodities from the forest. So they would sell the salt there. The Malians decided that instead of buying salt, and the reason the trade was conducted around Bopolu is they didn't want the merchants from the north to know where the salt was coming from. It's like Coca-Cola or any other company protecting its trade secrets. So they will have the merchants meet them there, they walk all the way there, bring the salt and trade it, and then go back to the coast. Long story short, the Malian emperor decided he would send people down to find the source of this salt. That way they wouldn't have to buy, and pay the price of the creators of the product. Well, people wandered for a while. It's all part of the oral tradition. And he reached Sierra Leone, and then from Sierra Leone, they came all the way across to Cape Mount. Those were the ancestors of the Vai. Yes. So the production of sea salt from our region by the day attracted the ancestors of the Vai to come and settle with them. But when they came, the Vai disconnected from the Malian Empire, and they joined with the Day living in that space, and they intermarried. And today in Liberia, we have Day Gola people, we have Day Vai, and Gola Vai, because over the centuries, people have been intermarrying and melding, if you will. So that the availability of these commodities, the fact that our people were pioneering in producing these things, shaped the history of the region. Kola, our Gola ancestors found out the properties of this product, and they were exporting it also to the north, to the Sahel. Today, Kola is embedded throughout West Africa, from Nigeria to Senegal, all the way. It's a sign of hospitality, friendship, clean-heartedness because you're sharing it with the other person. It's so West African. It originated with our people, and we don't claim it. We don't recognize it. And the same is true with Malagueta, the story I shared about Pedro de Centra. We exported it. It was seen as so valuable. It was called the Grain of Paradise. And then people came looking for the source of this commodity. And that's how the Portuguese arrived in our region. The influence of those products is so important that I thought, what, I need to build a story, around them. I also wanted to convey to Liberians that, we need to stop looking at ourselves as somehow lacking agency, being reactionary, reacting to things rather than being the ones who are initiating processes that affect other people. But one of the challenges from our history from that period is, we were producing and exporting raw commodities, raw products in our process, and we find ourselves still doing that. And so the sooner we can find ways to add value to the things we produce, the better off we will be. You think about soft drinks. When Coca-Cola started, they were using the actual extract from the cola plant in the drink. And later on, they developed the artificial version, right, for flavoring. But they adopted that into the drink because it helps to suppress thirst, it helps to suppress hunger. And it was our ancestors who found out the power of that product.
Wow. Okay. And when you describe the Windward Coast, You do not describe a forgotten corner. You describe a crossroads.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
crossroads that was so busy with ideas, trade, and movement. Now, if that is true, what lies do we need to unlearn about being from Liberia, Sierra Leone, or Guinea? And what healthy pride should we recover?
I'm glad you posed that question, Rev. Um, you see, I want to share with your audience, I should say, because I know that many who watch this program, watch this podcast, are Christians. Christians believe the Bible is a blueprint for a spiritual life. History is the blueprint for national life, I would argue, right? In terms of the connecting of people, history serves that way. It's a map of the past, our connections across, and so forth. If we don't have that, we are like Alzheimer's patients. Anybody who has had a loved one who suffers from Alzheimer's knows the challenges of orienting someone who has lost their memory. They don't remember their spouse. They don't remember, that this is their child. How challenging it can be. And you're trying to guide the person to say, let's go in the restroom, you need to take a shower, and they're going the opposite direction. But now you take that and multiply it by 5 million people who don't know who they are. It's a disaster.
Yeah.
And the other dimension of this is our story is not only confusing because it's not known, because it hasn't been fully investigated, but also because there are bits of erroneous information that people keep repeating. But I would like to say to the viewers that we have reached a critical junction, that there's a kind of a contest at the moment in the field of Liberian studies between falsehood and truth. And I would say to viewers, as consumers of history, you want to be careful what you consume.
Mm-hmm.
As you would be careful what you put into your body, it's important for us to be careful what we put into our hearts about who we are and our connections with each other. There are these divisive, disempowering myths that have circulated. And as someone who has tried to uncover the truth and bring it out, the attacks are just ongoing because people don't want the false narratives to be disturbed. But I think we're at a critical point, and I know that the contest is temporary because truth wins out in the end. I know this because as I travel and I give talks on the history of the country, the young Liberians in the diaspora in Liberia, they don't believe the myths. They don't believe the falsehoods anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They say this is not making sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're searching. And so when you are able to present them with cogent explanations,
Yeah.
they're like, okay, now I understand. So I just say to the consumers, the consumers of history, people who are passionate about our story, we just need to be mindful of what we are picking up. Ask ourselves, what's behind it? Is this person trained to do this? Are they taking care in what they do and how they explain? rather than doing like emotional appeals on the basis of propaganda. Uh, it should be reasoned. And so that's my understanding. That's where we are.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's always good to, search deeply, because when I read a book, it opened my eyes to something new, and the way you combine oral tradition and the archives that you search over those years. And one of the feature of your research that stands out is how you bring Liberian grouts, storytellers, and elders into the same conversation with Arabic, Portuguese, and European documents. Now,
Mhm.
we live in a world now that often trusts the archive over the elder. So then the question is, what are we losing when we dismiss oral tradition?
Uh, we risk we risk losing, I would say, half of the archives, because these are oral archives. What I
Mhm.
was able to pull is a file I have of Gola oral traditions. And one of these books was collected, oral traditions collected by Honorable Jangaba Johnson. All right, but here's why this is important. There's a bridge going from Bushra Island to Caldwell that's named after Zulu Duma. And it's based on people who used printed books with erroneous information, and they didn't consult oral tradition. So if you go through the records, right, of early Liberian ancestors, what you find is that people were interacting with Europeans for centuries. Um, Smoked fish, smoked herring, codfish, all came from Europe. Brandy, rum was available, etc. And our people were selling things from the coast, in exchange. Okay, but in the course of those interactions, there were local people on the coast who adopted European names. They were using European names. Some people lived in Europe for years and came back speaking Dutch, Portuguese, etc. One of the names that was popular was Peter. So the day ruler on Bushra Island, who negotiated with the ACS officials to make Cape Mesurado available, was named Peter, Tau Peter, the ruler. But his assistant, his prime minister or speaker, was called Long Peter. And there was, at that time in the early 1800s, a ruler in Cape Mount who was called Peter Softly. Peter Softly was the nickname of Zoluduma. The people who recorded the name Zoluduma as the name of Peter on Bushra Island were wrong, but they went with it. And the folks who decided to name the bridge went with what they saw in the book. Book not by a historian, by the way, was written by political scientists. So they got it wrong. But if you go to the oral traditions of the Kola, well, you find that Zoluduma was a slave kidnapper, kidnapping indigenous Africans to sell to slave merchants. And he was notorious, but he never lived anywhere near Bushra Island. He was living in Cape Mount. According to the oral traditions of the Gola, this man was so unscrupulous, he convinced his sister, who was the head of the Sandy Society, that he wanted her to bring the girls who were coming out of the society school, bring them to the coast so they could go on a ship and dance for the captain. And his sister brought the girls as soon as they graduated, took them on board the ship. What she didn't know is that Zolu Duma had made arrangements with the captain to sell the entire group into slavery. This is what the oral tradition records about this man, but it also records his location. And furthermore, if you consult a map of Kipmount based on the clans that lived there, prior to the war, there was a section of Kipmount that was called Zoluduma clan based on where he lived. So there was never any connection between him and Bushra Island or, the area around Caldwell. But people went with only the written records and they got it wrong. The question is whether, realizing that this was an error, people will be willing to correct themselves, correct the record. Because if we don't, we are providing erroneous information to the children. And moreover, as a nation, do we want to celebrate someone with that kind of ethics, morality? I would think not.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you clarified that, because when you put all of those voices of our ancestors and those records that you search side by side, that is a written record and a spoken memory, what happens? How does the story of this region change when the elder's voice is allowed to stand in the same room with the archive?
Yeah. I think for all sources, right, whether they are archaeological or anthropological or written history or otherwise, they have to be vetted. You see, that's why it's important, that people who are trained historians are involved in the process of collecting and vetting the records. So they have to be checked. Is there veracity here? Can you corroborate? In fact, I'm explaining, I'm preaching to the choir, because as a journalist yourself, or a long-time professional journalist, you know that journalists are trained not to rely on one source. You want multiple sources. You need someone to corroborate that what this man said is true, that he was there at the time, and so forth. So the more sources you have, the more reliable the information, right?
Yeah.
And if someone tells you, I was at this place and I saw this accident, but you find out that, no, actually, he was at a different location when the accident occurred, then he's disqualified to be used in your journalistic report. Well, police officers are supposed to work like that, judges and lawyers, but also, historians are trained to work that way. And what we do is we put oral tradition, written tradition, all of these into conversation with each other to try and corroborate what they are saying. I think that's the best way to do it, in my view.
That's true. That's the best way to do it. And talking about women, talking about kingship and power, that's another powerful theme in your book. It is the role of women. You demonstrate that many communities along this coast were matrilineal and that women held real political and economic authority. So when you place that history beside the way women are treated in many of our homes, in many of our churches, in many of our political system or our politics today, what tension do we feel?
It's unfortunate that we have come to see our past through the eyes of people who come from other regions of the world. And people came with certain presuppositions, certain assumptions about Africa and African culture. And the result is that, for example, the assumption was that women had a low status, very low status in our area. And the reality is that the status of women on the Windward Coast was in many ways more elevated than it was in many parts of Europe. And one of the reasons why you see that we had a Liberian woman, to serve at the United Nations, right? Head of the General Assembly. We had a woman who was head of the University of Liberia earlier than many other places. We elected a woman president and so forth. There are other countries that have, but there are developed countries that haven't. Mm-hmm. And so it is as if when women's rights became an issue in some countries, they then decide that, but you know what? These other people couldn't know any better than we do. They couldn't have lived in any way, different position of greater rights or equality for women than we have. And that's just unfortunate. Mm-hmm. Even in my lifetime, the clout that women enjoyed traditionally still existed. I grew up on Bushra Island around Douala.
Yeah.
And the nearest shop to our house was owned by Kapedi or Kruma. And if you went to Nuku Town, the shops there were owned by local people. You went into Monrovia in the 1950s and 60s. The stores there were owned by a number of Liberians. Mostly Liberians owned the stores. But what has happened is that when import and export is controlled in a way that marginalizes the traders don't have the opportunity to operate economically on a higher level. So women traders have been marginalized increasingly, right, over time as import and export becomes controlled by fewer people who are not connected to them. But if given the opportunity, our women traders with the experience that they have in the marketplace, there's no reason why they wouldn't be owning supermarkets and shops.
Okay. And in our society, we look at the patriarchal system, but how might recovering that memory of women's authority and responsibility in the past help us rethink about leadership, family life, and even church today? Yes. And the second question to that would be, what might it look like for us today to honor that history in a way that is faithful to both our culture and our Christian confession?
Well, it definitely makes a lot of difference when you appreciate what existed, before. That you don't go and look at your ancestors through the eyes of others who may have looked down on them, who assume that they were primitive, they were hunters and gatherers, they were less than, uncivilized, and so on. Because then you find yourself trapped. It's disempowering. You feel less than yourself because you feel like people before you were not, on par. The reality is that there's a reason why the Poorer and the Sandy societies existed. And it was not that one was superior to the other. They were parallel power institutions. Mm-hmm. And when capital punishment judgments were rendered, they had to be approved by the Sandy Mazuls because the logic was men don't deliver babies, women give birth. So ultimately, we have to approve of this judgment.
Wow. And talking about the spiritual worlds and cultural memory, you also talking about in your book about spiritual and cultural life. Figures like Mami Wata, Spada the Trickster, and even the famous Liberian finger snapping handshake. Mm-hmm. Now, for many Christians who are listening to you right now, these are topics that can be very sensitive.
Sure.
How do we honor our cultural memory and spiritual imagination without romanticizing the past or running from it in fear?
I'd like to answer that question, very important question, by inviting your audience to think about something for a minute. Why is it that in this globalized world we live in, there's a deference, a respect that is shown towards Hinduism, towards Buddhism, the religions of other regions of the world? In the US, you have yoga studios where people import from the East, right? These practices that were once associated with the religious and spiritual practices of other cultures. But African systems are almost universally demonized. And I would argue that it is disempowering. It causes Africans to assume a position of inferiority vis-a-vis the rest of the world. An unfounded position, because a lot of what the rest of the world benefits from started on that continent. I mean, as Christians, think about it. Harold has issued his order for the children of a certain age to be dispatched, seized. Where do the earthly parents of Jesus take the child? To Egypt, to Africa.
Yeah.
And so we have a place in the world, in the story of the world. Now, let me go to the point you made about Spider, because that's one of my favorite characters in the culture. Okay, so I grew up on Spider stories, absolutely, and I feel that we are profoundly lacking because we have not embedded Spider stories in our curriculum. We don't have cartoons on television that carry Spider and will inculcate the teachings related to Spider in the generations to come. Why do I say that? Because Spider was a means by which the ancestors were teaching critical values to the young ones. And those values were, don't be selfish. Don't be greedy. So Spider is presented as the main character, but he's not a hero. He's an anti-hero. So the children are being shown Spider in order to teach them, don't be like Spider. You remember Spider, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the story was, don't be like this character. Now, the lessons are being delivered, very important, foundational lessons in ethics, morality, and so on, but it's being delivered with humor.
Yes.
You take the medicine, but it's got syrup, to sweeten it. So when that night is over and you fall asleep, the next night you calling your parents or calling whoever, older siblings, oh, I want to hear another Spider story. Tell me that story again. You don't realize that what you're doing is you are bringing yourself into a world that structures your sense of morality and ethics and fairness, justice.
Yes.
It's a loss. Why are we doing away with? Why have we abandoned, those stories?
Mommy,
All
what time?
we want to run behind Snow White and Goldilocks. I can do both. I mean, I don't want to denigrate other people's culture. I just think that we can hold on to ours as well. And the world will benefit from learning from us.
Yes, and the Liberian finger snapping handshake too.
Yes. So you see, this goes back again, Reverend, to the fact that we have a lot of erroneous information out here, because many times, people will go with something that comes in their head and say, this is wow, I can explain it in the wrong way. I remember seeing online someone saying that finger snapping handshake was brought to Liberia from the US, that people snap fingers to show that a slave master didn't cut my finger off. So it shows that I'm a free man and that it was brought from the US. Well, let's pause and think about this for a minute. Why would a slave master, yes, the people who enslaved others were brutal, inhumane, but they were also practical. And you want people to work for you, why would you cut off their finger? You could do a lot of other bad things, but you'll be harming yourself.
It doesn't make sense economically.
But the thing is, when you go to the original sources and Europeans are coming to visit, what you find is reference to this snapping finger, which they said it only existed on the windward coast. These are people who had traveled from Senegal on ships, traveled all the way to Ghana and so on. They said, but in this area, these people snapped their fingers.
Okay, but our people have always believed that the seen and the unseen are connected.
Yes.
When you look at the way faith is practiced today in Liberia and the surrounding region, where do you see that older spiritual awareness still alive? And where do you think we need wise discernment so that our faith brings freedom and not bondage?
Wow. Rev, that might, to get the answer to those questions will require another show, perhaps another conversation. But let me say that, yes, our people believed very firmly that what we didn't see and what we saw were linked. It's almost like thinking about uranium or radiation. It's inherent as a power within this mineral, right? So even though you don't see what is emanating from the mineral, it can have an effect on you. Radiation can harm, or it can do good, depending on how it's used. And so that logic was embedded in our approach to the world, right? Respecting the power that's inherent in nature as we saw it. I find it disheartening that, many Christians don't accept the fact that our ancestors would look onto the hill and respect the mountains from which comes their strength. Because they are looking in awe at this geographic structure and giving proper due to the creator of this phenomenon. But when we read it in the Old Testaments and the Israelites say, the prophets say, then we say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But when our ancestors would do that, and they did it with Wologisi, they did it with Nimba, they did it with Grand Judet, we are dismissive.
Yeah.
But I would say that there was this awe, and mountains do inspire a kind of awe. And then the question becomes like, who planted this here? How did this, this immensity of this structure? And so we honor the force behind this.
Yeah. Let's talk about leadership. Now, you describe early communities with councils, shared authority, and complex kinship systems. Now, yet today we wrestle with strongman politics and fragile institutions. Now, if we could bring just one or two leadership lessons from that earlier world into Monrovia or Freetown right now, what might change?
Wow. Yes, I think the embrace of our traditions is really, really critical. And so what I would argue is, in West Africa, there were two competing types of political systems. The system that developed in the Sahel, the system of empires, right, and monarchs, was one. But in the forest area, in our region, there was democratic, decentralized governance. So the example I like to cite for people, because many of us are educated in Western schools, we know the history of Rome, we know about Greece, right? We know about Socrates and so on. Well, the Greek city-states, very democratic, right? And microscopic compared to Rome, the empire that stretched all along the Mediterranean, all the way, right, to Judea, all the way to Egypt, was a different model altogether. We were like the Greek city-states. So when people discuss this Socratic method of dialogue, to me, it's not strange, because it's very similar to what would happen in the Palaver Hut. People didn't go in the Palaver Hut to do cussing and shouting at each other, you know, and present themselves as ideologues. Mm-hmm. Not that long ago, before the war, in the 1960s, at least, I remember, you go to the Palaver Hut and there's orderly discussion, mm-hmm. guided by people who were mature.
Yeah.
And so I say that those traditions are absolutely worth recovering.
Yes.
We are lacking because we are losing them. And the sooner we act to bring them back, the better. You go to the universities today, which should be the centers of deliberative discussions, and you have young people shouting at each other, and they think that somehow this is our best cultural behavior, and it's not.
It's not it. But do you see practical ways that chiefs, pastors, teachers, and even youth leaders could draw from that older pattern of shared responsibility and mutual accountability?
Absolutely.
And if that's true, how might it shape the way we handle power, decision making, and public trust in our country today?
Yeah, I think it would profoundly affect how it shapes our conduct. Just starting with spider stories, for example, but then also in terms of the way in which society was structured, and the shared governance of people having their domains that they are responsible for. And, the blacksmith was not trying to impose his knowledge and, expertise in the area of people who are building bridges, or I'm talking about those vine bridges across marvelous works of engineering across great chasms, that we call monkey bridge. So people had expertise. The people on the coast, developed maritime culture, and they knew the ocean like the back of their hands. Mm-hmm. So when the Portuguese came, they taught the Portuguese the currents in the Atlantic around our area, because the Portuguese were coming from a different part of the world. They didn't understand the currents in our Atlantic. So that respect for balance, you got your expertise, we'll call on you for that. This other person has theirs. This is your domain, this is his domain. When we put those together, they balance. It's like the stool. It sits because the legs are, balanced. And that's why the Ghanaians embrace the stool symbolically to convey that, I would argue, visually to folks. I think that was part of the culture, and it needs to be reclaimed for our benefit.
And looking at the history, we can also see trauma. We can also see out of the trauma healing. Now, our region as a whole carries that deep wound, okay? Yeah. From slave trade to civil wars and displacement. Yeah. You have said that understanding our ancestors is a form of resistance and also resilience. Now, for a young Liberian or Sierra Leonean listening to you right now, who has never heard these stories of traders, healers, and leaders from centuries ago, how can this knowledge help them face unemployment, migration, pressure, and even trauma today?
Well, I think that when you are exposed to the stories of people who were resilient.
Mhm.
It's inspiring. It gives you something to hold on to. It gives you an example, it gives you models. Uh, when I started reading, my parents would bring stories home, uh, storybooks, that would encourage my interest in reading. But they also were intending to cultivate a sense that you can overcome obstacles. They would give me stories about people who were in some way uh, overcoming difficulties. Helen Keller, the blind American woman who became a writer and so forth, were some of the stories I remember, reading early. Our ancestors are examples
Mhm.
of resilience. Um, we need to draw on them as models. They made a way out of no way. Can you imagine the first of our people who enter that forest
Mhm.
to carve space for a village and then another village over here and then connect them with a path and eventually it develops beyond a path to something longer term,
Mhm.
and people are moving from one of those to the other in that environment, that
Mhm.
hostile environment with leopards, bush cows, predatory animals, but they are building life and community.
Yes. Risky.
It's powerful.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Wow, powerful. And if you're just joining us, this is the Gracious Hope Live podcast. We are here every Saturday at 6 p.m. And today, our special guest is Dr. C. Patrick Burrowes. He's a renowned Liberian historian. He has written many books, and his latest book, right here, you should get a copy. I read his book, and it's very fascinating. It's called Sea Salt, Kola, and Grains of Paradise, the untold history of Liberia's early ancestors, and it's available. You can go to the Facebook page. He has a Facebook page. You can click follow or like, and you see all his books. It is called Know Yourself Press.
May I
You
just
can,
say this, just to be precise, Rev,
yes.
is that the the link to the shop to get copies is know yourself, like no space, and dot press. Know
Okay.
yourself dot press. So it's not .com but dot press.
Dot press.
Um,
Okay.
and um, and the book is available now, $5 off. And if people order from the store, you get the book autographed. So you can get it elsewhere, but if you get it there, you get it autographed, and you get $5 off for your audience. So
So know yourself dot
right.
press.
Yes.
Okay, that's where you get a discount. And
Yes.
Christmas is coming. You can get a gift for someone that you love. That would be a perfect Christmas gift of this book. This book is a book of substance. There's a lot that we all can learn about identity, our culture, our social behavior, politics, women's role and kinship. A lot of things that you can find in this book here. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about history before Independence Day, 1847. And it's good for all of us to know about our history, because we don't want to see our children growing like strangers in our own land,
Mhm.
only looking at foreign stories. So there's a lot there you can learn. And of course, you can opine, ask any questions. Some of you making comments, and that is very, very encouraging. Thank you so much for making those comments. Now, Dr. Barros,
Yeah.
what practices of truth telling, remembering, and teaching would you like to see in our homes, our schools, churches, so that history becomes a tool for healing and not just a reminder of pain?
Yes. I guess we have to reach for the essence of our story. Like I tried to allude to earlier, we can always grasp for a snapshot of a location, And then we'll confuse that with the entire river. But the river is longer and it tells a different story.
Yes.
So people take these snapshots of pain and they accentuate them, right? Because they appeal to the emotion. And those points of emotional trauma are divisive. You know, we went through a civil war and this thing happened. But I'll give you an example, Rev. There was a time when you go on the internet to look up Liberia and all you see are pictures of, child soldiers, rebels dressed in women's clothes, or, different masks and what have you. And Liberia was reduced to that. And we have the stories of the pain. But when I went to Liberia, and I was there, for about 4 years or so, continuously, what struck me, because it went against the grain of what we constantly hear, were the stories people told me of heroes during the war. Not only warlords, right? Not only victimizers, but people who saved lives. And many of those stories involve people who were from other ethnic groups. Why did people remember those so much? Because they were unexpected.
Yes.
And they say, we were walking, me and my family, had to go through this checkpoint, and we reached the checkpoint, and then this man who was not related to us, we know him from anywhere. He was from a different ethnic group. He told the boy, he said, that my people in Atlanta Pass, and things like that. So in the midst of this story, that's what I'm saying now. If we look at the war just as a recent history, we can accentuate all we want, the trauma. This man did this bad thing, this man did it. But do we ever recover? Do we attempt to find the heroes? If we don't, then our entire history gets reduced to victims and villains, but no stories of valor. But the people who are virtuous and valorous are there. They exist. They existed. We can choose to ignore them, overlook them, or we can recover their stories.
And here's a question for you, Dr. Burrowes, someone who is listening here. We've got a lot of people listening here. Say, outside of your own work, what book will you recommend to the next generation of Liberians who are interested in that true story?
But everybody says you're brave, man. So I'm a jump on that book. It's fascinating. So there are many books out here. It depends on what the focus is,
what a person is looking for.
What period, there are different books that cover different periods. So it would depend on some of that.
Yes.
But I would just say, whatever you're choosing, one has to approach the books critically, and don't be blind about it. Ask yourself, how sensitive is the writer to the people that he or she is writing about? And there are other questions, and how trained this person is in recovering history and so forth. And so I'm just concerned that too often we settle for whatever people are giving out for free. And many times, the free things might not be the best for your health, mentally or otherwise. Let me ask you a question, Rev. And I'm posing the question, I guess, also to your audience. But how many books do you think are in my library?
How many books? Well, I know that you got
just a guess.
Over 1,000.
Okay.
Way back. But for what I have, my own collection, I got about
Yeah.
6 books of yours.
Okay. No, I would just say that in terms of the books that I own, not the books that I've consulted, because I've consulted library
Yes.
books, Library of
So
Congress.
I like the Black Christian Republicanism. I love that.
Okay.
I love that. And
Yeah.
I love this latest book here, which is the Sea Salt, Kola and Grains of Paradise.
Yeah.
And the one before then, you said between the
The Kola Forest.
Kola and
Salty.
forest something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Between the
yeah,
Kola Forest and the Salty Sea. But
yes.
but but in terms of the books that I own,
Mm-hmm.
there are about 4,000 plus. I
Yes.
know this now because we're in the process of packing to move to a smaller place. Children are all grown and gone. And as I'm packing, I'm inventorying my books, cataloging them. So I was taken aback. So you can imagine what books cost and how much, when you add it up, how much money went there, right? And I'm still counting. Now, in addition to the books that I own, and some of the books I bought them because I don't want to have to keep going to the library back and forth. So I go to the library to check things, yes, but I also have those books. I'm saying this, it's not a brag or something. It's my job, right? If I go in the kitchen of a chef and I see a whole bunch of seasoning, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a serious chef, right? So I have to buy books as a seasoning for what I do. But the point I'm making is that because of this, I approach history in a way that might be different from other people. If somebody jump by and start telling me the history of Liberia, and it's like, how many books has this person read? Oh, I read one book on the internet. This is what it said. Oh, I saw this Wikipedia page, and that's what it said. To me, that's not good enough. So my practice gives me a certain skepticism, or it informs how I approach history, how I approach what people are offering. And I'm inviting, us Liberians to really take our stories seriously. It has consequences for us and for our children,
And this is something that getting the history and understanding something that you started from almost childhood at 11 years old. I remember you were telling me at 11 in your household they used to give newspapers and a lot of reading from there on, and so you got very voracious in your reading habit.
Yeah, I started reading and I liked it. And then my parents decided to encourage me. But the thing that influenced me a lot was my dad brought a book home called Legends, Folktales and Legends of Liberia. And so it had spider stories, it had oral history in it and all that. And I just became fascinated because I used to be told spider stories. Now I was reading spider stories for myself. It added a different dimension,
Yes.
But then I was reading oral history, and that whetted my appetite for history.
Okay.
Yeah.
And writing history for ordinary people, making it simple or simplifying for people to understand. You, in a way, in a fascinating way, your writing style is understandable for a layperson. You often say that Liberian history has been trapped between dense academic text and thin propaganda. Now, when you crafted this book with maps, with stories, and clear language, who did you have in mind as the reader?
The young Liberians, I would say teenagers, college students were the ones in my mind. You see, when I did the Between the Kola Forest and the Salty Sea, 400 plus pages, it was a scientific work, a scholarly work. I wanted people to see the sources I used, to be able to judge it for themselves. They're not DC business I'm talking. I went to Paris, I went to London to collect things and so on. It's there. Okay. So when I did that book, my thinking was my peers, classmates would invite me and say, my man, come, let's talk about your book where you now publish, let's hear more. That's not what was happening. I kept getting invited to places where there were a lot of Liberians. Minnesota first, then Dallas, Atlanta, you name it, Philly, Staten Island. And the invitations kept coming from one particular demographic group of Liberians. And they were in their 30s or thereabouts, 20s to 40s, right around there. So my friends, my peers, they're like, man, I know everything I need to know about Liberia, you know? So, I mean, they'll just regurgitate things over and over and over, and that's it. Doris Banks or Guanu, that's it. But we are grown now, you know, we need more. And the young people were the ones who kept inviting. When I went to Liberia, it was the same experience. I was invited to speak in many, many places, Firestone, all the high schools in the district. The students came, and they're fascinated by the stories. So when I was doing the second version, a different version, I was thinking about them. How do I make it so that it will be attractive to them? And that's why the pages are in color. The images inside are in color. You know, I wanted to reach that audience of young people. The other reason the young were the ones responding, they are open-minded and they are curious. So it's not only a demographic, but it's a psychographic grouping. And so that this book is intended for them, really.
And what conversation do you hope will break out of this book because of this book, like in homes, classrooms, marketplaces, WhatsApp groups, and churches across Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the wider African diaspora? What do you hope people will start asking themselves and saying to each other?
The company that publishes my books is called Know Yourself Press, right? And the goal is for this book and the others that we should know ourselves. If I may, I would venture to say to you that Liberians who live in Monrovia or in the diaspora, in big towns in Liberia, Banga, Monrovia, but in the diaspora as well, we have an advantage. We have on offer to us the cuisine of all regions of Liberia. You wake up one Friday, you say, I'm going to a Liberian restaurant. I will have tobogi this today. Next time will be pambara. You know, the next time will be, you name it, right? It's available to us. But what we don't appreciate is that there are people in Kipamas or River G who have never had tobogi. There are people in Lofa who may have never had pambara. You understand? Because one's mobility opens up your view of the world and of Liberia. And in similar ways, as we may not have tasted the cuisine of a different region of Liberia, we have not experienced the stories. So a book like this, my hope is that it will knit us together. That someone sitting in Lofa can read and say, oh, I've been hearing about Gribble people. Oh, so that's the story. Oh, so the Gribble and the Kua people are related. Oh, so Basa, Ku, Gribble. Okay, now I get it. Because that's how we will come to understand ourselves as a nation. And that's my hope.
Yes. Dr. C. Patrick Burrowes, I would like to say thank you for sharing with us today. Before we close, we would like to ask you to speak directly to our listeners right now. There is a young man or woman listening in Pinsville or Ghanarsville or Monrovia or Banga or Buapulu County, a young woman listening in Freetown, a nurse in Ganta, a student in Makina, a taxi driver in Ghana, a Liberian or Sierra Leonean in the diaspora listening from Europe or America. Now, many of them were never taught this history. What simple first step will you urge them to take if they want to reclaim and honor the story of their ancestors?
Read, read. It's challenging in a way, right? But it's worth it. You owe it to yourself, you know. We can't continue to blame and say, oh, this person didn't do it, oh, that generation didn't do it. We have the means, it's available. Now the task falls to us to take the next step and to seek out the foundational knowledge of who we are. Because I'm telling you, to know your own story is a powerful, powerful thing. When Rwanda ended the genocide, one of the first things they did was to organize a conference on the history of Rwanda, because they felt that the old history was responsible in part for the divisiveness. They wanted to move forward, right? They felt that colonial history trapped them. And I think that, so the work, I've done my part, traveling and collecting and synthesizing, but I think that for young people, for the people you mentioned out there, if you can get your hands on information that's factual, you know, take the time, do the work. You don't have to do it by yourself. You can make it interesting and fun if you're doing it with a group, really. Early Christians read the Bible collectively. You're now on one man or one woman thing, right? And so I think we can reclaim that tradition, that practice in regards to our history.
And to all of our listeners, understand from all our conversation we had today, everything we talk about is that your story did not begin with slavery, war, or poverty. Your story is older and richer than that. You come from a people who traded, governed, created, worshipped, and built communities long before anyone drew colonial borders. We want to encourage you to ask questions at home, to listen to your elders, to read books like Sea Salt, Kola, and Grains of Paradise, and to share what you learn with your children, your church, and your friends. Let this conversation move you to see yourself not as an accident of history, but as a carrier of a long and meaningful line. May this knowledge lead us to wiser leadership, fairer trade, deeper faith, and stronger communities across Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the whole African diaspora. Dr. C. Patrick Burrowes, thank you so much once again for being with us today.
Thank you, Rev. Thank you so much for the invitation, but also thank you for your thorough and critical reading of the book, which is obvious in the questions that you asked and some of the comments that you made. I deeply appreciate it.
All right. And to all of you listening, thank you so much for spending this time with us on Gracious Hope Podcast. If this episode blessed you, share it with someone, continue the conversation, and keep seeking truth that brings hope. Until next time, this is Alexander Red, your host. Sorry, Reverend Swadede, the co-host, is not in today due to some commitments. Stay hopeful, stay thoughtful, and God bless you all. Thank you, Dr. Burrowes.
Thank you.
Have a blessed weekend.
To you too. Thanks.
Bye for now. And this is how we say goodbye. We'll see you next Saturday, the same time, 6 p.m. And for our end, we'd like to say goodbye.